We're here tonight with Mayor of Canton, William J. Healy II, who made a very compelling speech to the members of the Stark County Democratic Party Jefferson Jackson Club. And of course, I have a few questions to follow up on the main points that you made, Mayor. First of all, you brought out the notion that City of Canton needs to be looking at the possibility of presenting to the voters, perhaps, an increase in the Canton City income tax. Is that, do I have that right?
Yeah, I think it's time to have that conversation. We did everything we could over the last 5 budgets to not have to go there. And quite frankly, it's been very challenging, but I think we've been very successful. In fact, more successful than most other local governments in reference to dealing with that. But looking at what's coming up in 2013 on cuts and reductions that are already in the books, we're going to look at a $4 to $4.5 million cut. That's a significant cut. And to give an example of what that would mean, if nothing changes, that's equivalent to us laying off somewhere in the range of 90 to 100 safety forces, policemen and firemen. And there's obviously not something any of us want to do. So now we have to look at how do we generate revenues or make other reductions that would allow us to save those kinds of dollars. And after 5 years of making cuts and changes, there's not a whole lot of options left. So we're having the conversations right now with all of the other elected officials in small groups to discuss the realities of what we're facing and how to prepare for 2013. And I've been adamant about in the financial side of city government is to not just worry about today, but also plan for next year and beyond. And we have been positioning ourselves, even last year, when we knew that we were meeting the budget needs and we had more money coming in, we put all that in our rainy day fund and we had to carry over $1.6 million, knowing that we would need that to make it through 2012. Well, 2012's here, the economy's changing, it's getting better, but the impact from the state government changes is more devastating than what the Great Recession was to our budget.
Now, in the your State of the City message, you brought out this notion of making Canton Utica capital. Mm-hmm. Is that going to abate future problems or not?
Well, it's certainly going to help. I can tell you that since we've done that, we have had conversations with dozens and dozens of companies that are involved in the oil and gas exploration, some big, some small. We've got more companies. In fact, we've had a couple of companies announce and make decisions in the last 2 weeks alone that are bringing engineering firms here and small offices and big offices and what have you. And that's creating jobs and also revenue. And we're seeing the income tax revenue increase. What happened with the Timken company and their investments, what's happening with basically all the companies in our area, you're seeing them bring back laid off employees, starting to hire new employees, and the revenue streams are starting to grow. But it's not growing anywhere near fast enough to offset the millions of dollars in cuts we're getting from Columbus. And that's our issue. So yes, we've made it through the recession. Yes, things are turning around and we've got a bright future. The oil and gas industry could be the turnaround for our region for the next 10 or 20 years. But it's going to take a few years for that to build up. And in the meantime, we've got the immediate cut staring us in the face.
I see.
So we have to. You got to do something to bridge the gap.
Now, I take it that some of your conversations with elected officials include council persons?
Yes. In fact, I've got a meeting tomorrow with a couple of more. I think the last of them we're meeting with tomorrow. We've met with virtually all the council members, including tomorrow's meeting. We've met with the other elected officials, including the judicial side, and really started the conversations about what ifs. And essentially, we're faced with 3 choices or some combination of the 3. Choice 1, nothing changes. We've got to make cuts of $4.5 million, which means we have massive layoffs in the general fund, which means police and firemen. That's 70% of the budget, and a lot of the other costs are fixed. So there's not a lot of other places to go. If that happens, we're talking about 35–40% of our safety forces off the streets. We can't afford that. We can't do it. We've already reduced them over attrition. We just can't go any further. But that's the only option I have if nothing else happens. The second option is to look at things that might generate revenue, like signing leases for mineral rights on some city properties, or cutting the tax credit program that we give 100% tax credit to other residents who work in other cities and pay their taxes. Maybe looking at the traffic camera issue that could generate revenue for us. Looking at some other minor restructuring things that could generate a little bit here, a little there. Those are the types of things we're going to have to look at that can generate dollars, but may or may not be enough, and more importantly, may or may not have the support of council. Because we might say, hey, traffic cameras are a great source of revenue, but council might say, you know what, we don't want that. And we explored that a few years ago. They turned it down. We're going to reintroduce that. I'm sorry. We're not going to introduce it. We're going to open that door again to have the conversations, to re-explore whether or not we want to move forward on that. The realities are, regardless of which direction we want to go, it's going to have to go through council, because you're going to need a majority of council or even greater in order to be able to do some of these actions. Those types of things. And if you remember last year, we knew that we were going to get hit with these cuts. And we started talking about, we're going to have serious conversations about real changes in finances, and I'm asking for everybody to participate. And we had elected officials, union representatives, employees, citizens. Everybody was able to submit ideas that would help us save money or generate revenue. We took that list and we reviewed it, and there were some small areas, 5 or 10 things that were small things that would generate 5,000 here, or 25,000 there, a little bit more. And we were able to implement some of that stuff and make it happen just through administrative. There are a number of items on that list that are just impossible. Things like, we'll play the lottery, and if you win, you can use that money to balance the books. Well, that's not realistic. So we had to take those items and say, yeah, we can't do those under any circumstances. And then we took the items that were real, but people really didn't want to have to talk about. For example, the parking, the traffic cameras. Okay, didn't really want to go there because we turned that down before, but now maybe we have to rethink that. Addressing the tax credit, say maybe going to a 50% tax credit instead of 100. More and more cities are doing that. If we do that, that'll generate $1.5 million for us extra. But council may not want to go that path. We can look at other things that will be out there, like a senior tax credit that we give. That could generate a couple $100,000 if we eliminate that. Well, who wants to take away a credit for seniors? So these are conversations that are real generating revenue or reduction of cost items that we have to now have those conversations that, when we were able to meet our budgetary needs, didn't have to have the conversation. Now we have to have that. If council chooses to do some of those things, then we'll move that direction. If they choose not to do those things, then the option is, again, the layoffs, or the last option is going back to the public and saying it's time to talk about raising taxes. It's been since the 1980s since we've had a tax increase in the city of Canton, and we're looking at, do we take our income tax that's at 2% and say maybe we raise it to 2.5%? That would generate enough money for us. If you compare the city of Canton's income tax numbers compared to the top 10 cities in Ohio, we're on the low end. Some are at 2.25%, 2.5%, and 2 3/4, and we're at 2%. So other cities have already made that move, and we haven't. So you can talk about that as a possibility. It does go to the voters. So we're not raising taxes. We're saying, let's take it to the voters and let them decide. We'll share the information with them and see what they do.
If it happens, would it likely happen in November?
It will have to be in November, because we're talking about January when the money's gone. So whatever we do, and that's the key about having to talk about it now, from a timing standpoint, we know that we have to have, and by the way, that was an income tax. We might say, you know what, let's not do the income. Let's do a safety levy like other communities have done. Parma did a safety levy, a police levy, a fire levy, and that comes from the property tax. And we could potentially present that and say 100% of that will go towards safety. Okay, and so that could be a message. So we're talking about the options, whether it's a property tax or an income tax, or if it's a safety levy or it's a general fund levy, merger of parks and recreation. What can we do, and what's realistic in reference to the timeline we have.
Now, I know you like to do polling.
Yes.
Where I'm heading there is to get some input from the would-be voters.
Yes, but here's what has to happen. If we poll now, the voters have no clue what the information is or what the options are, and so just a poll it's not real helpful, because it's say, hey, would you vote for a tax increase? No.
No, right.
But what we'll have to do is, if council chooses to go towards a tax increase rather than making some other cuts or other activities, and by the way, and I want to make sure you understand this is not a council action based on what council wants to do. It does have to go through council and get their support. Of course, as mayor, I have to sign off on it. Right. So they'll have the administration or the executive committee with the legislative committee, and we also have talked to the judicial side, and they understand exactly the situation. So if we want to go forward, it's going to be a united effort saying, you know what, we all agree we're going this way, and we're going to go to the people and do this. And if we're not all united, there's not going to be an issue going to the public. But whatever we do, it will be a request. If we do this, it will be a request to the public for them to consider it. And from a timeline standpoint, we need to start the public meetings. But before we had the public meetings, I need to sit down with each of the elected officials, and not just the elected officials, but the leadership of the police department and the fire department and the ASME units and the police unions and the fire units. So we're meeting with the chiefs and the unions and the ASME and those representatives, so they're all aware of what's going on and what their role is in reference to if we do one thing or another. So once we have had all those conversations, I believe that the council will then, through their finance committee, start the conversations about what are our options and what should we do, and they'll have the public meetings. And once they have the public meetings, then they're probably, before they even vote on it, then they're probably going to have the real public meetings, and that's where they do go out into the community and present to the different locations around the city and say, here's our story, here's the issues, here's our options, and here's what we're looking at. What's the opinion of the public? That'll allow us to have the newspaper opinions. You'll be able to have an opportunity to make your position on it and tell us what your thoughts are. Everybody else will be able to have that, and then we'll sit down with the repository and so on. And then council will then be at a point where they're going to have to vote on whether they put it on the ballot or not. And if they put it on the ballot, then we have to have the legal documents so that it's written up properly and and all that has to happen before the 1st of August, because you have to get to the Board of Elections in time so it can make it on the ballot. So our timeline really is finishing up by next week all the internal conversations will be had. Within another week or so, we'll start having the public meetings and set up the public hearings. And then from there, the council will have to take action in reference to whether they're going to go through with it or not. And then if that happens, then we go through the political process. Okay. But from a timing standpoint, we need to do it now. I can't wait till November and say, geez, guys, we're short-handed. What are we going to do? It's for next year.
Now, turning to a more political slant on your presentation night, and obviously your comments about the cuts in local government funding was directed at the Republicans. Have you sat down with the Republicans that represent Stark County in the Ohio General Assembly and gotten any feedback from them or made any impression on them that these cuts have to stop?
Well, when you talk to Scott Olsager and Kirk Schuring, and I've talked to both of them, they're very understanding of the situation, and they also seem to be they seem to get it in reference to the impact it's having on us. Although they're on the Republican side of the aisle, the question is when you've got a supermajority like they have in both the House and the Senate, even if our local guys say they're not interested, it's still happening. And as you know, in the legislature, there's only so many times that they can go against their leadership, right, before they lose their committees and so on. And so I think they've been doing what they can and fighting to help us with the local government issues. But it's a big issue. I have sat down directly with Governor Kasich, and I've in representing and working with the Ohio Municipal League. We've met with him and made it very clear to him how serious this is. And another issue they're talking about is trying to collect local income taxes at the state level.
You think that's a bad idea?
Oh, a horrible idea. And here's a direct conversation we had with the governor, which I found really interesting. The first conversation was, hey, Governor, the local government fund was a commitment by state government that they went out and wanted to pass a sales tax. But in order to do that, they needed the cities and the voters in the cities to stand with them, or else it would never happen. So they basically came to us and said, if you guys support this, we will take a portion of that and give it back to the local governments so that you'll have a fund. Because our concern at the time, this was 50 years ago, whatever it was, our concern was if you pass a state tax, we're not going to be able to pass a local tax because people can only pay so many taxes. So the answer was, okay, instead of charging 4 cents, we'll charge 5 cents on the sales tax, and we'll give one back to you, or whatever the percentage was. And so that agreement was made. Our people endorsed it. They got the votes, and it passed the statewide sales tax. Well, it's held true ever since then, until this governor came along and said, I don't believe in redistribution of funds. We need to take that money, and we'll use that to balance the state's books. So they cut from us, and they cut 50% of that money.
And you think there's more to come?
Yeah, absolutely. When I talked to the governor and said, hey, please don't take any more, we're being devastated, and his response was, I don't believe in redistribution of funds. Okay, so in other words, that's what he told me. No, this is what he told me. That's not your money, that's our money, and I don't believe in redistribution of funds.
Now I don't think that's been reported in the mainstream media. Why do you think the governor's getting a pass on that?
Well, I mean, I've been talking about it. The municipal league's been talking about it. It was a very interesting exchange. But the more interesting part about that is while he's standing there and saying, that I don't believe in that, and he took the money. Then the next topic up directly in order was in reference to them collecting the local income tax. And we stood up and said, hey, wait a second. If you start collecting the local income tax, first of all, you want to get your management fee off of that. Second, when are you going to decide that you need to keep that money and not give it back to us? And he says, point blank, because I'm making a promise right now that I'm not going to touch your money. And I said, but we had a promise on the local government money, and you're taking that. He said, I never made that promise. And I said, okay, great. Then what's going to stop the next governor from standing up and saying, now that I have your income tax money, I didn't make that promise. It was the other guy. Okay, so I mean, it was just awful in reference to the hypocrisy of I didn't make that promise and I don't have to give you that money, but I'm making this promise and so you can trust me. No, we don't. Not after what he's done to local government.